Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. Today, I'm taking it easy for me, anyways, and I'm doing a book that I'm not going to give you pictures for. Not that I couldn't have dug pictures up off the internet, because I probably could have, but because this isn't a book with a lot of pictures. The book has this one cover, which is illustrating a specific event in the course of this book. Now this book, The Book of Dragons by Nesbit, is, yes, another favorite of mine. Shocker, since, the premise of this whole channel is books that I liked. Um, so I wasn't the hugest fan of Nesbit. I read Five Children in It and her other two books with the same children that I don't remember the title of, the Phoenix and the Carpet one. Anyways, I did read them as a kid. Actually, there's that thing that happened where I read ahead in the book, and Dad told me that if I was going to be reading ahead, then I could just read to myself because he wasn't going to be reading aloud to me anymore, and thus ended my days of having my parents read aloud to me. But anyways, but I always liked this book, partly because, as observed in the afterword written by Anne McCaffrey, and I wouldn't advise that you read this for the afterword by Anne McCaffrey because her afterword is kind of a lot like these videos have been. There's this thing, and then there's this thing, and I like this thing, and that thing was funny. So, it's an afterword that really could have been written by just about anybody, and the only reason they picked Anne McCaffrey was because she is the authoress of the Dragon Riders of Pern series, which I eventually do plan to get to whenever it is that I decide to start picking up on book series. So, let's talk for a moment here about Nesbit. Nesbit is there's actually a little bio of her at the start of this, that she's from the mid-1800s. She was born in the mid-1800s, and is, you could consider her to be at least a bit of a feminist, a bit of a feminist idol kind of person. She wore her hair cut short, smoked in public, and cared little for social conventions, which is a direct quote from the little bio of her in this book. This book is a collection of short stories, each of which features a dragon in it, even if the dragon or dragons are not necessarily a central character or villain. The Book of Beasts, which is the first one, was always very, very amusing because it's the story of little Lionel who didn't expect to become king any more than you or I would, but somehow became king. And he finds a magic book and accidentally lets a dragon loose on his kingdom. And it's an amusing little story because it's kind of exactly how you would expect the kingship of a 6-year-old boy to go if nobody bothered to actually, tell him, and here's your Lord Regent who will handle all of this king stuff for you until you're old enough to do it. The cover of the book, as you see here, is entitled, is from the short story The Ice Dragon, or Do As You Are Told. And that's a story about two kids who, now these are all set in England, and it's and that year Guy Fawkes Day didn't happen, and so these two, and so it's much later in the year. It's actually coming up on winter when the 11th of December, when they decide to have a firework day to make up for the fact that they didn't have Guy Fawkes Day. And these two kids Upon spotting the aurora borealis, which, according to E. Nesbit in this book, the North Pole and everything in it tends to travel southward come wintertime. That's why it gets so cold. And the two children head off to find the North Pole in spite of the fact that they were told not to, leave the backyard or anything. So they head up to the North Pole, and up there they have one of those traditional fairy tale adventures of the do a kindness to a small animal and it will come back and help you when the big monster comes. So they do a couple of those on the way, and then they are taken captive, and the dragon really almost comes in as an afterthought at the end. The real villains of the piece are the monster seal people, who are people made entirely out of seal skin. Like, they're just people of seal skin. And they had been trying to wake the dragon up to make it eat everybody. Except the dragon had been frozen so long, as you see here, it had turned into an ice dragon, and heating it up just made it unhappy and faint. Anyway, so the ice dragon gets up and starts heading south, because once you're all the way at the North Pole, where is there to go but south? And brings the kids home, and along the way melts. So the dragon in that story is kind of a side issue, but it's always very, very entertaining. What's very entertaining is that it is not the dragon in this, of course. It's statements like, and just when George and Jane were starting for the North Pole, the Arctic regions had come down very nearly as far as Forest Hill, so that as the children walked on, it grew colder and colder. Um, and so on and so forth, because as we know, when winter comes, the Arctic comes all the way nearly down as far as Forest Hill, doesn't it? That's Forest Hill around London, not Forest Hill in Ontario, Canada, because we all know in Ontario, Canada, that the Arctic basically comes about as far as Richmond Hill and stops dead, forming what we in the Greater Toronto Area will call often the snow belt. For some reason, they get more snow than everybody else, and we're not quite sure why, but there's some sort of thing at work. I mean, I'm sure somebody knows. Don't tell me about it in the comments if anybody feels the need to comment. So those are just a couple of the stories in this. The Island of the Nine Whirlpools is very much my favorite, of course. And I think that's mostly just because of the last line, which in the last paragraph, rather, in which E. Nesbit says to us, I have no doubt that you will wish to know what the princess lived on during the long years when the dragon did the cooking. My dear, she lived on her income, and that is a thing which a great many people would like to be able to do. And it's just very, very funny, and frankly, it's a statement that I suspect is meant for any adults who are stuck reading this book to their children, or possibly for children who are smart enough to understand what that means. Now, if you're wondering, of course, the story there is that this princess is kept captive in a tower by a griffin who does the cleaning and a dragon who, after all, dragons are very warm, does the cooking. And she's in the tower for like 100 years or something. Only there was this spell cast by a witch to make every day the same as the last, so that the passage of time wouldn't wear on her, because every day it would be like, and tomorrow, and yesterday was when I was dropped off in the tower, and tomorrow is when I will be rescued. And she basically would wake up every morning with that same feeling that, and tomorrow I'll be rescued, and yesterday I was dropped off, and so it means that time doesn't wear on her, which I thought was a very, very clever thing, actually, of E. Nesbit to basically ensure that nobody suffers the psychological damage of being trapped alone in a tower with nothing but a surly dragon and a somewhat surly griffin to keep her company, and being aware that the 9 whirlpools surrounding her tower are killing prince after prince after prince coming to rescue her. In the end, of course, she is rescued. The Island of the 9 Whirlpools is, I mean, the bit about a great many people would like to be able to live off of their income is, of course, funny. But there's also a marvelous section in there about how her light of love had to use math to calculate something because, of course, she creates a very complicated arithmetic question in the middle of this book because it turns out that the whirlpools stop and the tide goes down once in every 24 hours and do it 5 minutes earlier every 24 hours. But of course, he has to get past the dragon and the griffin in order to rescue the princess, and so added on to the sum is the issue that if the dragon sleeps every day and does it 3 minutes later every day, in how many days and at what time in the day will the tide go down 3 minutes before the dragon falls asleep? And so I'm sure somebody out there could do that easily. I know I can't. But E. Nesbit informs us that you could do it in a minute because you have been to a good school and have taken pains with your lessons. But it was quite otherwise with poor Nigel. He sat down to work out his sum with a piece of chalk on a smooth stone. He tried by practice in the unitary method, by multiplication and by rule of 3 3/4. He tried it by decimals and by compound interest. He tried it by square root and by cube root. He tried it by addition, simple and otherwise. And he tried it by mixed examples and vulgar fractions. She goes on like that quite a bit, and it's all a big confuzzling pile of mathematical statements that don't mean anything at all. But it's nonetheless very amusing to read through as you picture somebody desperately trying to figure out this particular puzzle. There is the story, The Dragon Tamers, in which a dragon winds up turning into the beginning of all cats, and Uncle James or the Purple Stranger, where you have an almost Lilliputian or Brobdingnagian sort of concept of a country where everything on this little island is the wrong size. The dormouse is the largest animal on the island, and the princess has a pet elephant that she brings to bed with her and snuggles with. And a dragon lands on the island, and Uncle James, who is a wicked sorcerer, tries to feed his niece, the princess, to it, and they eventually beat the dragon and Uncle James. It's all very amusing. And Kind Little Edmund, which is an odd story because, on the one hand, it very much gives one the value of following directions, but on the other hand, Edmund seems an extremely kind person and a good person who just doesn't like going to school, and he gets really rather severely punished in spite of the fact that he wants to save everybody and is just curious. And so it's a bit of a mixed message and a very amusing one. This, of course, has been another children's book, and I do recommend it because it's funny and silly and ridiculous, and occasionally rather sharp-tongued. And at some point, I will actually manage to pluck a book off the shelf that is a book for adults again. In the meantime, thank you all for listening and showing up, and if anybody chooses to comment, that would be fantastic. See you soon.